Hello, everyone. Today's commentary concerns the truly existential threat which anti-Semitism poses to not only the nation of Israel, but to Jewish people throughout the world. It's called A New Holocaust, from the river to the sea. We begin with a quotation from Professor Thomas Sowell, who wrote, "People who argue that the hostility to Israel in the Middle East is due to Israel's treatment of the Palestinians should explain why hostility to Jews in the Middle East was so great back in the 1930s that Middle East leaders were pro-Hitler. This was long before there was a modern state of Israel or a Palestinian problem." End quote. The popular slogan, "From the river to the sea," is chanted by Arab Palestinian supporters, and many from the left have picked up on it. The statement implies a Jewless Middle East. Where will 7 million Jews go this time? To new gas chambers? The media, publishing Hamas propaganda stoking the murderous hatred of Jews, is largely to blame. It is a flashback to the 1930s, where Nazis are now replaced by Islamists, and the left to complete the new extermination of the Jews. The left, with its media, handles the propaganda, the Islamists, the execution. Why is Hamas false propaganda information about genocide accepted without any scrutiny? A young activist recently said online with glowing passion that Israel murdered 51,000 children in Gaza. Claims like this only incite new anti-Semitism. Good luck trying to convince such people that the reference data cited here comes directly from Hamas. The facts are that Hamas forces Arab Palestinian children back to the houses which Israel warns in advance are going to be bombed. Israel does so in the hunt for Hamas butchers, the same ones who routinely use innocent civilians as human shields. Despite all of this, politicians refuse to act. Tomorrow is too late. They need to use the full weight of the law to hold the news media accountable for inciting violence against a group of people and reporting on a genocide that simply does not exist. Perhaps set up a committee to investigate these media outlets, or carefully register all false and misleading news reporting about Israel? If decision makers can be prosecuted, then let it be so. Create a more healthy and truthful, objective news reporting. We must all realize the danger here. The goal of the nation surrounding Israel is actually destruction of the state of Israel and every Jew. Iran has long had utter annihilation of Israel on its agenda, which they are trying to complete by producing nuclear weapons. Hamas would gleefully carry out the 7 October 2023 massacre on a scale 1,000 times larger. The democratic nation of Israel, which has had a 3 millennia history in its tiny territory, is fighting to survive. It is surrounded by land masses 100 times larger, with hostile dictatorships and hundreds of Jew-hating Muslims. Hamas reporting of alleged, distorted, or completely false events in Gaza has thus been published without objective critique. Israel and its Jews have been demonized, a strategy well known from Nazi Germany, so that the outside world can accept a new extermination of the Jews. On the centennial anniversary of the publication of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, his genocidal anti-Semitism still lingers. In one of his last statements on Judaism from the 3rd of January 1945, Hitler told Martin Bormann, 1900 to 1945, his personal secretary and head of the NSDAP chancellery, quote, "I never held the opinion that the Chinese or the Japanese, for example, were racially inferior. I admit that their tradition is superior to ours. Our Nordic racial consciousness is aggressive only towards the Jewish race. However, we speak of a Jewish race only for reasons of linguistic convenience, for from the genetic point of view, there is no Jewish race. Circumstances make us label in this way a racially and spiritually coherent group, membership in which is claimed by Jews all over the world, no matter which individual citizenship is given by passports. This group of people we call the Jewish race. The Jewish race is most of all a spiritual community. Spiritual race is tougher and more enduring than natural race. The Jew, wherever he goes, remains a Jew, and to us he must appear as a piece of evidence for the superiority of spirit over flesh. The ideology of both Hamas and Iran includes being able to sacrifice their own populations for the sake of the cause and to lie unbridled in achieving their goals. They even sacrifice their own people by using them for propaganda purposes. The question every politician and news provider must now ask themselves, beyond all smokescreens, is this: can I go to sleep at night with the guilt of having participated in the extermination of 7 million Jews? Well, one journalist who does not need to ask himself this question is Douglas Murray. In his travels throughout Israel and Gaza, the international best-selling British author has seen the best and the worst humanity has to offer and has no trouble choosing a side. Murray is not Jewish. Prior to the 7th of October 2023, he had never lived in Israel. However, he objects to being lied to, and Israel has been on the receiving end of the biggest, deepest, longest lies in history. Israel's commitment to fundamental Western values such as capitalism, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law have made it a beacon of light in a region dominated by authoritarian extremism. Israel's principles vividly contrast with the ideology of Hamas, which openly proclaims its love of death over life. With incisive moral clarity, Murray's new book On Democracies and Death Cults exposes how the campus left and international establishment confuse this conflict. How do they do it? Well, by calling on Israel for restraint and proportionality while Hamas commits genocide. By slandering Israelis as white colonialists while only a third of Israelis are Jews of European ancestry. By framing the conflict as oppressor versus oppressed, when it is really between a thriving multi-ethnic democracy and a death cult bent upon its annihilation. Drawing upon extensive on-the-ground reporting in Israel, Gaza, and Lebanon, Murray places the latest violence in its proper historical context. He takes readers on a harrowing journey through the aftermath of the 7th of October massacre, piecing together exclusive accounts from victims, survivors, and even the terrorists responsible for the atrocities. Murray persuasively presents the case that if left unchecked, misplaced sympathy could embolden the evil forces that seek to undermine not only Israel, but all of Western civilization. Meanwhile, the Islamic Republic of Iran's global image is in further disarray after the recent Trump-led Israeli and American bombings, and the specter of regime change looms again. The question everyone must now ask is, will the Iranian regime finally fall? Iranian nuclear sites may well have been destroyed and high-profile scientists and military leaders assassinated, but the regime stands. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has emerged from hiding to declare victory over America and Israel, despite appearing shaken and struggling to speak clearly. Like him, the regime limps on, continuing to persecute its citizens and threaten both the Iranian diaspora and the world at large. Canada should be especially vigilant. The Islamic Republic of Iran was established in 1979 when the Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile in Paris to overthrow the monarchy of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. In place of the old monarchy, Khomeini ushered in what he called Islamic government, an ill-defined concept that met with immediate opposition from clerical authorities and even Iraq's first president, Abu Hassan Bani-Sadr. The regime has been steadily losing legitimacy and support ever since. A 2020 poll conducted by the Group for Analyzing and Measuring Attitudes in Iran, or GAMAN, suggested a dramatic rejection of regime-directed religion. 78% of Iranians reported believing in God, but 60% say that they do not pray. 68% believe that religious persecution should be excluded from state legislation. 72% of Iranians rejected compulsory veiling of women, or the hijab. 56% do not want religious indoctrination of their children in school, and 71% believe that the state should not fund religious institutions. Islam, unbelievably, is now the fastest shrinking religion in Iran. Christianity is rapidly supplanting it. Attendance at Friday prayers is accordingly so minute that 2/3 of all Iranian mosques have been forced to close in recent years. Meanwhile, attitudes within the Iranian regime itself remain surprisingly favorable. A 2022 Gaman poll posed the simple question: Islamic Republic, yes or no? The response? 81% said no. They may disagree about what should replace the Islamic Republic, but most Iranians are united in their opposition to it. Despite this, some Canadians continue to support the current regime. The Canadian Union of Public Employees, or CUPE, for instance, recently organized a pro-regime protest outside the U.S. consulate in Toronto. Even more seriously, Iranian regime agents have reportedly issued death threats aimed at silencing Iranian Canadian dissidents and anti-regime activists. It has tapped tin pot Canadian biker gangs for contract killings on Canadian soil. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand, in typically inept fashion, has weekly warned that the Iranian regime may be preparing to activate terrorist sleeper cells here in Canada. Hundreds of regime operatives and spies are now active in this country, a fact that has been known for years, and yet very little has been done about them or to protect Jewish Canadians. If Canadians think that this is not worth worrying about, then we are deeply delusional. The Iranian regime has targeted our citizens for decades. The first such high-profile case was that of Zahra Kazemi, the Iranian-Canadian photojournalist who was arrested, raped, tortured, and murdered at Evin Prison at Tehran in 2003. Since then, many Iranian Canadians have suffered suspicious deaths, suggesting regime involvement. These deaths seem to culminate in 2020 when the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, shot down a Ukrainian International Airlines flight shortly after takeoff from Tehran, killing 55 Canadians. Since then, the regime operatives have tried to harass and intimidate the victims' families. In late 2024, the RCMP foiled an Iranian plot to murder former Liberal Justice Minister Irwin Cotler. Such threats led the Canadian government to classify IRGC a terrorist organization in 2024, a move that was frankly long overdue. Yet, Iranian regime operatives masterminded the recent anti-Semitic pro-Hamas encampments and demonstrations in our major cities and universities. We need to ask why we've been so very naive. Why are we so open to foreign interference, and why we allowed our country to become a haven for operatives from a sadistic and thuggish regime? Why have only 3 senior regime officials been deported from Canada thus far? The tottering Iranian regime may not have a nuclear bomb, but now that it has been humiliated, it could become even more dangerous. A shaken regime will be looking for scapegoats and revenge, both at home and abroad. And if the regime falls, its chief figures may seek haven in Canada. We cannot permit that to occur. What we must instead be supporting is Israel's total victory in Gaza. So, what will it take for that to happen? Well, the war in Gaza has been going on for over 650 days as of this writing, the same length of time the Israeli hostages have been held by Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or PIJ, in Gaza tunnels. The very objectives of the Israeli government laid out for victory have not been fully met. 50 hostages, 20 assumed alive and the rest murdered by Hamas, remain captured. Hamas is still on its feet, with 15,000 dead and many more wounded. Despite losing its top commanders and political leaders in the Gaza Strip, Hamas continues to resist and control the Gazan population. A major part of the problem for Israeli policymakers and the IDF command is the media. Leftist Hebrew channels and most of their TV anchors have contempt for Netanyahu and his right-of-center government. They have thus skewed their reportage and hyped the hostage situation. Netanyahu and his government have been targeted as the reason for the absence of a resolution that would free the hostages, a wish the entire nation of Israel shares. Lost in the hyperbole is the fact that many Israelis support a government which attempts to save lives rather than carpet bombing the entire region. Hamas operatives see the same Israeli TV broadcasts that Israelis watch. They derive immense pleasure from seeing the families of the hostages, encouraged by TV hosts, rail against the government and Netanyahu, demanding that a deal be struck with Hamas at all costs. Their calls to end the war on Hamas terms would leave the terrorists in place, armed and in control of the Gaza Strip. The families of the hostages traveled to the U.S. to meet with President Trump, adding pressure on Israel to end the war without the IDF being able to accomplish its goals. Instead of demanding that more American influence be applied to Hamas and Qatar, they are maligning Netanyahu, accusing him of being more concerned with self-preservation than ending the war and releasing hostages. Yet it is Hamas and not Israel which has rejected all efforts to reach a compromised amnesty deal. Israeli leaders, including Netanyahu, must speak less about eradicating Hamas and do more to actually make that happen. The unnecessary statements from Defense Minister Israel Katz and Prime Minister Netanyahu are unproductive and simply provide fodder for the foreign press to attack Israel. Israel often employs a Western mindset when dealing with the cruel terrorist groups who respect only overwhelming power. Jerusalem has made chronic mistakes in Gaza that have prevented Israel from achieving ultimate victory. One such mistake is believing that Qatar and the Hamas leadership in Doha can influence Hamas in Gaza to become more flexible regarding a hostage deal. Another mistake was rejecting the idea of occupying the entire Gaza Strip. Depriving Hamas of territory in Gaza would render hostage ransom pointless and give Israel command over negotiations for their release. Likewise, it would reverse the roles, with Israel setting the terms on who is to be released, hopefully all 50 of them at once. The strategy for a total victory must go beyond military triumph to change the reality on the ground. Although IDF troops have been victorious in their encounters with Hamas and PIJ terrorists, killing all of them will take years and compromise the lives of many IDF soldiers. Israel must therefore exploit Hamas' weakness and disconnect them from the general population in Gaza by using elements within the Islamic faith and culture to expose and foil Hamas recruitment efforts. Distribution of humanitarian aid to Gazans must continue to be carried out by a third party, with the IDF being in charge of security. Israel must also encourage and support those Palestinians who seek to immigrate to other countries in accordance with President Trump's vision. Gazan reconstruction must be conditional upon freeing all hostages and their safe return to Israel, disarming the Hamas and PIJ fighters, facilitating their exile to Muslim nations like Malaysia or Indonesia, as well as de-radicalization of the education system in Gaza for remaining residents and their children. Finally, the legal constraints placed upon IDF operations in Gaza must be lifted. The IDF must be able to use its full force to overwhelm Hamas. The media in Israel must become more responsible and stop doing Hamas bidding. It is high time for the IDF to be unrestrained in order to win the war. Only then can the 7 million Israeli people be assured that Hamas and Iran are unable to prosecute another genocide like the one that happened in Europe during World War II. We should, of course, not trivialize the Holocaust by equating it with the 7th of October 2023 Hamas attacks. In the actual Holocaust, 6 million Jews were murdered, along with an estimated 5 million Gentiles. On the 7th of October, some 1,400 Israelis, mostly Jews, were murdered by Hamas terrorists. This is not mass murder on the same scale, even if the motives are frighteningly similar. Libraries full of books recount the unspeakable horrors perpetrated by the Nazis and their collaborators. The scale and degree of their barbarity is beyond anything else in recorded history. Sadly, it was within that same 40-year era of terror that two of the other great 20th century genocides also occurred. Mao eliminated an estimated 40 to 50 million Chinese people. Soviet leaders Lenin and Stalin sanctioned political murders totaling 110 millions, according to one credible estimate. Such figures are buried in Google search results, attributing as few as 1 million deaths to Lenin and 1.5 million to Stalin, presumably by those today who are sympathetic toward communism. Then there are the communist genocides in Cambodia, North Korea, Cuba, and a host of other nations. Based upon exhaustive research, R.J. Rummel pegs the world total of 20th century murders by government at an astounding 262 million persons. We must therefore be careful not to trivialize the memory of any of these events by comparing them with lesser crimes against humanity. And yet we must also deeply sympathize with the victims of the 7th of October attacks, which were brutal and extensive. In his award-winning book, 1944, FDR and the Year That Changed History, Jay Winnick includes an account of the persecution of European Jews from 1943 to 1945 at the very height of the final solution. It is dizzying to contemplate the horror of those years. Not just the sheer numbers killed, but also the viciousness and the inhumanity of the crimes themselves. Perhaps most appalling is the utter lack of conscience and human feeling on the part of Hitler and his aides, and indeed on the part of millions of others throughout the world who made no effort to stop the killing, including FDR. Even Winnick's condensed account of what happened is quite troubling, both because of the cruelty of the events and the suggestion that the potential exists for them to recur in our own time. That is why the Hamas attack of 7 October and its nearly 2-year aftermath have so shaken the world. As Winnick points out, annihilation was one of Hitler's favorite terms applied to Jewish people. In most cases, Jewish victims were not simply shot and buried. They were rounded up, transported in slow box cars to the camps, made to undress, packed into fake showers, and gassed. Their corpses then cremated into ashes. Others were shot with revolvers, machine-gunned, burned alive, and buried in pits they were forced to dig for themselves. What took place at Auschwitz, Treblinka, Dachau, and other death camps was a precise enactment of Hitler's thinking and of millions of other Germans. 6 million Jews were annihilated. In order to do this on a mass scale, it was necessary for the Nazis to depict Jews as subhuman or not even sentient. In Hitler's parlance, Jews were insects, parasites, rats, germs. Even as he attempted to conceal the full scale of this genocide from the world, Hitler sold the Holocaust to the German people by dehumanizing Jews and other victims. Similarly, Hamas has not hidden its crimes. Many of them were posted online with the assumption that their admirers would support their actions. These videos confirm how similar Hamas is in its criminality to the Nazis. The 7th of October attacks resembled the genocide of the Holocaust, though on a much smaller scale. But what if Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran were able to carry out their stated goal of the complete annihilation of Israel? That act would not be just like the Holocaust. It would be another Holocaust. No doubt, millions in the Middle East and many outside of it, even here in the West, support that goal. The mind reels when considering the depth of hatred that exists not just toward Israel, but in hundreds of other locations today around the world. The 7th of October 2023 was not another Holocaust, but the cruel psychopathy of genocide is still very much with us, even in such advanced countries as the US and Canada. So our task, therefore, as Christians, is to recognize and call out this hatred and to oppose its growth into acts of violence against the Jewish people, both at home and throughout the world. May God bless and preserve the nation of Israel and its courageous people. We close with a quotation from Psalm 125, verses 1 and 2. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but abides forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people from this time forth and forever.